The eviction notice fluttered onto Mei Rivera's doorstep the same rain-soaked April morning. Her ancient Ford pickup gave its final shuddering cough. A coincidence so perfect in its cruelty that she could only stand in the downpour, keys in hand, as both her transportation and housing security died simultaneously. At 36, with custody of her 8-year-old daughter Lily, 2 part-time jobs, and a mountain of medical debt, Mei had mastered the art of financial triage. But even her carefully constructed system of minimum payments and desperate prioritization was crumbling beneath the weight of impossible choices. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She picked up the eviction notice, the red lettering bleeding, slightly in the rain, and stared at it with hollow resignation. 60 days, she whispered, calculating swiftly. Even with her morning shifts at the community college library and weekend hours at the accounting firm, she was still $400 short on rent, and now she needed transportation too. The morning had begun with such ordinary routine. Mei had woken at 5:15 a.m. as always, navigating the creaking floorboards of their modest 2-bedroom apartment with practiced stealth. She'd prepared Lily's lunch, peanut butter and banana sandwich, carrot sticks, and the homemade granola bar she'd baked yesterday with the last of their pantry supplies. She'd even tucked in a quarter for the school's charity collection, wanting her daughter to experience the dignity of giving despite their circumstances. But then, the pickup had refused to start, and with it, her carefully balanced life had tipped into crisis. "Mom," Lily called from the apartment doorway, backpack slung over her small shoulders, dark hair plaited neatly despite Mei's hurried fingers. "We're going to be late." Mei forced a smile, tucking the eviction notice into her jacket pocket. "Change of plans, sweetheart. We're walking today." "But it's raining," Lily observed, with an 8-year-old's straightforward logic. "Then we'll get wet," Mei replied, retrieving their only umbrella from beside the door. "Adventures require flexibility." It was something Lily's father used to say, before the cancer took him 3 years ago, leaving behind nothing but memories, medical bills, and a daughter who sometimes still cried for him in the night. They walked the 15 blocks to Oak Ridge Elementary in the steady drizzle, Mei calculating. With each step, she could call her sister for a loan, but Jasmine was struggling with her own family's finances. The credit cards were already maxed. The small emergency fund she'd painstakingly built had been depleted by Lily's dental work last month. "Ms. Rivera!" The voice interrupted her mental mathematics. Mei looked up to see Principal Thornton waving from the school entrance. "I'm so glad I caught you," he said, ushering them under the building's overhang. "The City Historical Society called. They're desperate for someone with accounting experience to inventory an abandoned factory they've acquired. Apparently, the previous person quit without warning." Mei blinked, momentarily confused by this non sequitur. "I'm not sure I understand." "I recommended you," Principal Thornton explained. "I mentioned to Mrs. Delacourt that you have accounting experience when she chaperoned the museum field trip last week. She's on the Historical Society board and called me this morning. It's a 2-week temporary position, but it pays quite well." "How well?" Mei asked, practicality overriding politeness. $1,500 for the complete inventory, plus a $500 bonus if you finish within the 2 weeks. $2,000. The number blazed in Mei's mind like a lighthouse. It would cover the rent deficit, repair the truck, maybe even start rebuilding the emergency fund. "It's the old Westmore manufacturing building," Principal Thornton continued. "You know that enormous brick factory on River Street that's been abandoned for decades? The Historical Society finally acquired it for preservation. They need someone to catalog everything before renovation starts." "The haunted factory?" Lily piped up, eyes wide. "Tyler says there are ghosts there." Tyler Henderson has an overactive imagination, Principal Thornton said kindly. It's just an old building with an interesting history. I'll take it, Mei said decisively. When do they need me to start? Today, if possible. Mrs. Delacourt said to call her if you're interested. He handed Mei a business card. I hope it helps, Ms. Rivera. I know things have been challenging. The understatement hung between them, acknowledged but not dwelled upon. After dropping Lily off at her classroom, Mei stood under the school's entrance canopy and called the number. Eleanor Delacour answered on the second ring, her cultured voice warm with relief. Ms. Rivera, Edward said you might call. Can you possibly start this afternoon? We're under tremendous pressure from the City Council to complete the inventory before the preservation grant deadline. I have my library shift until 2, Mei explained. I could start at 3. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Perfect. The building's caretaker, Mr. Novak, will meet you with the keys. And Ms. Rivera, we're quite desperate. If you could work weekends too, we'd add another $200 to the final payment. $2,200. Enough to breathe again, at least temporarily. I'll be there, Mei promised, already mentally rearranging her schedule. She could bring Lily with her on the weekend shifts. The girl loved exploring, and if it meant financial survival, they'd make it work. Mei's morning shift at the library passed in a blur of shelved books and hushed conversations. Her supervisor, a kind woman named Gloria, who knew about Mei's situation, agreed to rearrange her hours to accommodate the temporary job. You look like you could use some good luck, Gloria observed, pushing a paper bag across the circulation desk. Leftover muffins from the children's reading hour. Take them for Lily. Mei accepted the gift with gratitude that burned behind her eyes. Small kindnesses sometimes hurt the most. By 3 o'clock, she stood before the imposing brick facade of Westmore Manufacturing. Built in 1887, the factory had once been the economic heart of Riverdale, employing hundreds in the production of industrial machinery. It had closed abruptly in 1972, and except for occasional trespassers and rumored squatters, had stood empty for 50 years. The building dominated an entire city block, its red brick exterior weathered but impressive, tall windows mostly intact. Despite decades of neglect, ivy climbed portions of the wall, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned. Impressive, isn't it? Mei turned to find an elderly man approaching, keys jangling from a large ring in his hand. His lined face suggested someone who had spent decades working outdoors, and his eyes held the sharp clarity of an active mind in an aging body. Stefan Novak, he introduced himself, caretaker and unofficial historian. Mei Rivera, she replied, shaking his offered hand. I'm here for the inventory job. Good. High time someone catalogued what's left before the preservationists get carried away with their renovations. He gestured toward the entrance. The Historical Society acquired the building 6 months ago, but there's been one delay after another. Meanwhile, I keep the roof from leaking and the vandals from destroying what's left. He unlocked the massive front doors, their hinges protesting with a groan that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. Mei stepped inside and involuntarily gasped. Despite decades of abandonment, Westmore Manufacturing retained a dignified grandeur. The entrance hall featured a sweeping staircase of iron and oak, leading to a mezzanine that overlooked the main floor. Ornate metalwork adorned the railings and support columns, displaying the craftsmanship of another era. The Westmores believed that even industrial spaces should be beautiful, Stefan explained, noting her reaction. Frederick Westmore was quite the aesthete, despite his practical business sense. Beyond the entrance hall stretched the main factory floor, an enormous space filled with massive machinery, workstations, and the ghosts of industrial production. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon light that penetrated the tall windows, giving the space an ethereal quality. "The building has 5 levels," Stefan continued, leading her through the main floor. "Administrative offices on the mezzanine, production areas here on the main floor, storage in the basement, and the upper floors were additional workspaces. Your job is to catalog everything: machinery, furniture, documents, artifacts, anything that remains." Mei nodded, already feeling overwhelmed by the scale of the task. "Do I have access to all areas?" "Almost all," Stefan replied, his tone shifting slightly. "The northeast section of the basement is structurally unsound. It's been locked off, for safety reasons." He handed her a set of keys, each labeled with meticulous handwriting. "Office space has been set up for you on the mezzanine level. Mrs. Delacourt left inventory forms, a camera, and basic supplies. The electricity works in most areas, but I'd recommend finishing before dark if possible. The lighting is unreliable." "Any other safety concerns I should know about?" Mei asked, mentally calculating how she would manage the transportation issue. The factory was 3 miles from her apartment, walkable but time-consuming. "Nothing immediate," Stefan said. "Just the usual hazards of an old building. Watch your step, be aware of your surroundings, and don't disturb anything that looks structural." He paused, seeming to consider something before continuing. "There's one other thing. The Westmore family has a complicated history in this town. You might find documents or items that shed light on certain rumors. The Historical Society wants everything catalogued, regardless of how it might affect the family's legacy." "What kind of rumors?" Mei asked, curiosity piqued. Stefan's weathered face remained carefully neutral. "Industrial accidents, financial irregularities, connections to government contracts that were never fully explained. Nothing definitive, just local gossip that's persisted for decades." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Mei's practical nature asserted itself. She needed this job, regardless of local history or rumors. "I'll document everything I find, exactly as I find it," she promised. Stefan nodded, seeming satisfied. "I live in the caretaker's cottage behind the main building. If you need anything, that's where I'll be." After he left, Mei stood alone in the entrance hall, the enormity of both the building and the task before her, settling in like the dust that covered every surface. $2,200, she reminded herself. Focus on the outcome, not the obstacles. She made her way to the mezzanine office, finding it furnished with a sturdy desk, filing cabinets, and the promised inventory supplies. The office overlooked the factory floor, providing a comprehensive view of the main production area. It had clearly been a supervisor's space designed to monitor work below. Mei organized the inventory forms, tested the camera, and mapped out a systematic approach to the massive building. Start with the administrative spaces, move to the production floor, then tackle storage areas. Leave the upper floors for when she had a better understanding of the factory's operations. As she worked through the afternoon, photographing and documenting the contents of the mezzanine offices, Mei gradually built a picture of Westmore Manufacturing's day-to-day operations. The correspondence files revealed a company that had been at the forefront of industrial machinery production from the late 1800s through the mid-20th century. Orders from across the country, employee records spanning generations, financial ledgers, showing the ebb and flow of prosperity. One filing cabinet, its lock broken long ago, contained personnel records from the 1960s, the final decade of operation. Mei documented each folder methodically, noting the names, positions, and dates of employment. Most followed predictable patterns: hiring, occasional disciplinary notes, performance reviews, retirement or resignation. But as the afternoon light began to fade, Mei discovered an anomaly. A separate section of employee files marked only with numbers instead of names. Each contained minimal information. No photographs, no personal details, just dates of work and vague job descriptions, like special projects or research division. Mei photographed these unusual files, making detailed notes about their deviation from standard personnel records. As she worked, a prickling sense of unease began to build. Why would a manufacturing company keep unnamed employees? What were these special projects that required such secrecy? By 6 o'clock, the light had diminished enough to make photography difficult. Mei gathered her notes, locked the office, and made her way back through the factory floor to the main entrance. The building felt different in the fading light, the machinery casting long shadows that seemed to move at the corner of her vision. She locked the main doors behind her and began the long walk home, her mind preoccupied with the mysterious files and the first day's discoveries. The temporary job had initially seemed straightforward, catalogue the contents of an abandoned factory. But Stefan's cryptic comments about the Westmore family's complicated history and the numbered employee files suggested there might be more to this inventory than simply preparing for historical preservation. The walk took nearly an hour, giving Mei plenty of time to contemplate the puzzle. By the time she collected Lily from their neighbor Mrs. Patel, who watched her after school, Mei had decided to research the Westmore family's history once Lily was asleep. "How was your day, sweetie?" Mei asked as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. "We learned about ecosystems," Lily replied, "and Tyler still says the factory is haunted. Is it scary there, Mom?" "Not scary," Mei said, unlocking their door. "Just old and interesting, full of history and machines that tell stories about the past." "Can I come with you sometime?" Lily asked, eyes bright with curiosity that so reminded Mei of her late husband. "This weekend," Mei promised. "You can be my special assistant." After dinner, simple pasta with the last of their grocery provisions, Mei helped Lily with homework, supervised bath time, and read 2 chapters of their current bedtime book. Once her daughter was asleep, Mei opened her laptop at the kitchen table and began researching. The Westmore family had indeed been prominent in Riverdale's history. Frederick Westmore, the company's founder, had established the factory in 1887, building it into a regional powerhouse of industrial production. His son, Howard, had expanded the business during the early 20th century, securing lucrative contracts during both world wars. But it was Walter Westmore, the third generation, who caught Mei's attention. Walter had taken control in 1952 and shifted the company's focus toward what contemporary news articles vaguely described as specialized industrial applications for government use. Under his leadership, parts of the factory had been renovated for classified production, with increased security and restricted areas. Local newspaper archives revealed growing community concern during the 1960s. Several articles mentioned workers falling ill with unexplained symptoms, environmental complaints about strange discharges into the river, rumors of midnight deliveries and unmarked government vehicles. Then, in 1972, the factory closed abruptly. No warning, no explanation beyond a terse press release citing changing market conditions. Hundreds of workers lost their jobs overnight. Walter Westmore moved away, reportedly to Washington, D.C., and the factory had remained abandoned ever since. The most intriguing article came from 1994, when a former employee had attempted to raise concerns about what he called the basement projects. The local newspaper had published a brief interview, but subsequent issues contained a retraction and apology to the Westmore family for unfounded allegations. The employee, James Martinez, had apparently left town shortly afterward. Mei sat back, rubbing her tired eyes. What had begun as a straightforward inventory job was developing unexpected dimensions. the numbered employee files, the classified production, the abrupt closure, all suggested something beyond ordinary manufacturing had occurred at Westmore. Her phone chimed with a text from Mrs. Delacourt. "How was your first day? Finding everything you need?" Mei hesitated, then typed a carefully neutral response. "First day, productive. Catalogued administrative records on mezzanine level. Question: were there classified government projects at the factory? Found unusual personnel files?" The reply came quickly. "Yes, government contracts in the 60s. All declassified now. Document everything thoroughly." The message seemed innocuous enough, but something about its promptness and brevity heightened Mei's curiosity rather than satisfying it. She set an alarm for early morning, planning to get Lily to school and return to the factory as quickly as possible. The numbered files warranted closer examination. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with shadowy figures moving through the factory's cavernous spaces, faceless employees with numbers instead of names, and Walter Westmore watching it all from the mezzanine office where she'd spent her day. Morning brought rain again, a steady downpour that made the walk to school and then to the factory a miserable slog. By the time Mei unlocked the main doors of Westmore Manufacturing, she was drenched despite her umbrella, her worn shoes squelching on the marble floor of the entrance hall. "You look like you could use this," Stefan said, appearing from a side corridor with a steaming mug in his hand. Mei accepted the coffee gratefully, surprised by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you. I didn't realize you'd be here today." "I'm here most days," he replied, "keeping an eye on things. 60 years of habit is hard to break." The statement caught Mei's attention. "You worked here, at Westmore?" Stefan nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Maintenance department, 1958 to 1972, until the closure." "Then you might know about the numbered employees," Mei said, watching his reaction closely. "I found files yesterday, no names, just numbers and special projects designations." Something flickered across Stefan's weathered face. Recognition, concern, perhaps wariness. "The research division," he said after a moment. "Walter Westmore's special team. They worked in the secured areas, mainly the northeast section of the basement." "The section you said was structurally unsound," Mei noted. "The one that's locked off." Stefan's gaze sharpened. "Yes, and it remains off limits for good reason." Mei decided to press further. "What were they researching, these numbered employees?" "Above my pay grade," Stefan replied, his tone suggesting the conversation was concluded. "I maintained equipment, fixed leaks, changed light bulbs. Whatever happened in the restricted areas stayed there." He moved toward the exit. "I've got errands in town. Lock up when you leave tonight." After he departed, Mei stood in the entrance hall, coffee cooling in her hands, contemplating this new information. Stefan had worked here during the period in question, yet claimed ignorance about the research division's activities. His deflection only intensified her curiosity. She returned to the mezzanine office and continued her inventory work, methodically documenting the remaining administrative files. By mid-morning, she had finished with the office spaces and moved on to the factory floor, photographing and cataloguing the massive machinery. Each piece told part of the factory's story: lathes, milling machines, drill presses, assembly stations, the backbone of American industrial might during the mid-20th century. Mei worked efficiently, her accounting background helping her create detailed descriptions and classifications. As she moved through the main floor, she noticed something odd about the layout. The northeast corner contained newer equipment, different from the standard production machinery. These pieces seemed more specialized, with what appeared to be monitoring stations and testing apparatus rather than manufacturing equipment. Following this trail of newer machinery, Mei found herself approaching a heavy metal door marked R&D Division, Authorized personnel only. It was secured with a padlock that looked considerably newer than its surroundings. Consulting her key ring, Mei found one labeled R&D. She hesitated, remembering Stefan's warning about the northeast section of the basement being off-limits. But this wasn't the basement, it was the main floor, and Mrs. Delacourt had instructed her to document everything. The key turned smoothly in the padlock. The door opened to reveal a stairwell leading down to the basement, specifically to the northeast section of the basement that Stefan had declared structurally unsound. Mei stood at the threshold, professional obligation warring with caution. The stairwell lights still functioned when she flipped the switch, illuminating concrete, steps that showed no signs of structural compromise. No visible cracks, no water damage, nothing to suggest danger. $2,200, she reminded herself. Complete documentation within 2 weeks. Mrs. Delacourt's instruction to document everything thoroughly. Decision made. Mei began her descent, camera ready, inventory forms tucked into her clipboard. The stairwell led to another heavy door, this one secured with an elaborate locking mechanism that appeared to have once required an access card or code. Now, however, it stood partially ajar, the security system long defunct. Mei pushed the door open, revealing a space unlike anything else she'd seen in the factory. The northeast basement had been converted into what appeared to be a research laboratory. Workstations lined the walls, each equipped with specialized equipment she couldn't identify. Central tables held what looked like testing apparatus. Filing. Cabinets stood in ordered rows along one wall. Most surprising was the condition. While dusty from disuse, this area showed none of the decay or vandalism evident in the rest of the building. It appeared to have been deliberately preserved, or at least protected from the elements and intruders. Mei began her documentation methodically, photographing each workstation, each piece of equipment. The technical nature of the apparatus was beyond her expertise, but she recorded detailed descriptions and model numbers where available. The filing cabinets proved most illuminating. Unlike the administrative records upstairs, these files detailed research projects with cryptic names, like Operation Riverflow and Project Nightshade and Clearwater Protocol. The documents contained technical specifications, chemical formulas, and testing data that meant little to Mei's untrained eye, but clearly represented sophisticated scientific research. Most concerning were the medical files, records of volunteer participants identified only by numbers that corresponded to the numbered employee files she'd found upstairs. These documented what appeared to be controlled exposure to various substances, with detailed observations of physiological responses. Mei photographed everything, her unease growing with each new discovery. This wasn't standard industrial manufacturing. The Westmore factory appeared to have been conducting human experimentation under government contract, using employees designated only by numbers. As she worked her way through the laboratory space, Mei discovered a door at the far end marked simply storage. This one was secured with a combination lock, its mechanism still functional despite decades of disuse. She checked her keyring, finding nothing that would help with a combination lock. About to turn away, Mei noticed a sequence of numbers scratched faintly into the wall beside the door, 37 to 1624. It seemed too deliberate to be random graffiti. After a moment's hesitation, she tried the numbers on the lock. With a click that seemed unnaturally loud in the silent laboratory, the lock opened. The storage room beyond contained shelving units filled with carefully labeled containers. Each bore hazard warnings and classification codes. Most disturbing were the containers marked River Water Samples Control and River Water Samples Post-Introduction, with dates spanning 1965 to 1972. At the back of the storage room stood a large safe, its door ajar. Inside, Mei found what appeared to be the culmination of Westmore Manufacturing's secret research, detailed documentation of Project Riverflow, a program designed to test the distribution efficiency of chemical agents through municipal water systems using the local river as a delivery mechanism. The files contained photographs of modified water treatment equipment, technical specifications for chemical compounds with names Mei didn't recognize, and most damning, reports documenting increased hospitalizations in Riverdale's riverside neighborhoods during test periods. Mei's hands trembled as she photographed these documents. The implications were staggering. Westmore Manufacturing, under government contract, had apparently been using Riverdale's citizens as unwitting test subjects for chemical compounds introduced through the water supply. The final document in the safe was a letter dated June 17, 1972, just days before the factory's abrupt closure. It was from Walter Westmore to a recipient identified only as General, expressing concerns about unintended civilian health impacts and ethical considerations regarding Project Riverflow. The letter recommended immediate cessation of testing and comprehensive review of all data before proceeding to full implementation. Had Walter Westmore developed a conscience? Had his apparent whistleblowing led to the factory's sudden shutdown? The letter suggested a narrative very different from the public story of changing market conditions. Mei carefully documented everything, knowing she had discovered something far beyond a simple factory inventory. These records revealed decades of covert government testing on unsuspecting citizens, testing that might explain the elevated cancer rates, respiratory issues, and neurological disorders that had plagued Riverdale for generations. Her own husband had died of an aggressive cancer uncommon in someone his age. Had he, too, been an unwitting victim of Project Riverflow's legacy? As Mei completed her documentation of the safe's contents, a noise from the laboratory beyond made her freeze, footsteps, too heavy to be ignored, moving with purpose through the space she had just catalogued. She carefully closed the safe, leaving it as she had found it, and moved quietly to the storage room door, peering through the narrow opening. Stefan Novak stood at one of the filing cabinets, methodically removing folders and placing them in a large canvas bag. His movements were practiced, efficient, those of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. Mei's mind raced. The caretaker had claimed to be running errands in town, yet here he was, removing documents from the very area he had declared off-limits due to structural concerns. Concerns that Mei now realized showed no actual evidence in the well-preserved space. She had two choices: confront him or remain hidden and observe. Practical self-preservation won out. This job meant financial survival for her and Lily. Creating conflict with Stefan before understanding his motives could jeopardize everything. Mei stayed motionless, watching as Stefan continued his document removal. After what seemed an eternity, he zipped the canvas bag closed and moved toward the exit, never approaching the storage room where she hid. Only when the sound of his footsteps had faded up the stairwell did Mei emerge, heart pounding. She checked the filing cabinet he had targeted, the one containing records of Clearwater Protocol. Several folders were now missing. The implications were clear. Stefan was removing evidence, selectively editing the historical record before it could be officially documented. The question was why, and for whom. Mei glanced at her watch, shocked to discover it was already past noon. She had spent the entire morning in the basement laboratory, uncovering secrets that had remained hidden for 50 years. She gathered her documentation and made her way back upstairs, carefully relocking the R&D door behind her. The main factory floor seemed almost innocent now, its massive machinery mere tools of production rather than the cover for something far more sinister. As she crossed toward the mezzanine office to secure her notes and photographs, Mei heard voices from the entrance hall, Stefan's familiar gruff tone and a woman's cultured cadence that must belong to Eleanor Delacour. "And making excellent progress," Mrs. Delacour was saying. "Very thorough, just as you recommended." "Too thorough," Stefan replied, his voice low but carrying in the cavernous space. "She's asking questions about the research division." "That's to be expected, with the files still in place. The Historical Society Board wants everything documented before decisions are made about sensitive materials." "Some materials shouldn't be documented at all," Stefan countered. "You know what's at stake if certain information becomes public." Their voices faded as they moved toward another part of the building. Mei remained frozen on the factory floor, processing this overheard exchange. Mrs. Delacour knew about the sensitive materials. The Historical Society Board was making decisions about what would remain in the public record. This inventory job wasn't simply about cataloguing an abandoned factory's contents for preservation. It was about assessing exactly what evidence remained of Project Riverflow and related research before determining what the public would be allowed to know. And Mei now possessed documentation of everything: the numbered employees, the experimental protocols, the river water testing, the letter suggesting Walter Westmore had tried to end the program. She quickly secured her notes and camera in her backpack, rather than leaving them in the mezzanine office as she had yesterday. Whatever game was being played here, she needed to protect the evidence she had gathered. The remainder of the afternoon, Mei spent cataloguing the main floor machinery, deliberately avoiding the R&D area and working as if she had never discovered the basement laboratory. When Mrs. Delacour appeared to check on her progress, Mei reported, documenting the administrative files and beginning work on the production equipment, making no mention of her morning's discoveries. "Wonderful progress," Mrs. Delacour praised, her elegant appearance somewhat at odds with the dusty industrial setting. "The board will be pleased. Do you think you'll need the full 2 weeks?" "It's hard to say," Mei replied carefully. "The building is extensive and proper documentation takes time." Of course, quality over speed, though we do appreciate efficiency." Mrs. Delacour's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Stefan mentioned you had questions about some personnel files." The casual question carried weight, Mei now recognized. "Just trying to understand the organizational structure," she answered. "Some filing systems are more logical than others." Mrs. Delacour seemed satisfied with this non-answer. "Let me know if you need any clarification. Historical context can be so important for proper cataloguing." After she departed, Mei continued her work on the main floor until 5 o'clock, maintaining the appearance of the diligent inventory specialist, focused solely on her assigned task. She saw no sign of Stefan for the remainder of the day. The walk home gave Mei time to think. She had uncovered evidence of government-sanctioned chemical testing on unknowing citizens, testing that had likely continued to affect Riverdale's health long after the factory closed. The elevated cancer rates, the respiratory issues that plagued riverside neighborhoods, her own husband's premature death, all potentially connected to Project Riverflow. But what should she do with this information? The Historical Society, or whoever they actually represented, clearly intended to control the narrative. Stefan was already removing documents. Mrs. Delacour was monitoring Mei's discoveries with calculated interest. By the time she reached their apartment building, Mei had made her decision. Tonight, after Lily was asleep, she would copy all her documentation and secure it somewhere safe. Tomorrow, she would continue the inventory as if nothing had changed, gathering as much evidence as possible before anyone realized what she had discovered. The weekend would bring its own complications, as she had promised to bring Lily with her. The girl could not be exposed to the basement laboratory or its disturbing contents, but Mei needed to continue her documentation before more evidence disappeared. As she climbed the stairs to their apartment, the eviction notice still in her pocket, the broken-down truck still in the parking lot, Mei realized that what had begun as financial salvation had become something far more significant. She had stumbled upon a 50-year-old government conspiracy that had potentially harmed generations of Riverdale citizens, including, perhaps, her own family. The simple inventory job had become a moral crossroads, and Mei Rivera, single mother and part-time accountant, now held the power to expose decades of covered-up experimentation. The only question was whether she could do so without endangering herself and the daughter who depended on her for everything. That night, after tucking Lily into bed with extra kisses and reassurances that the weekend would bring their promised adventure, Mei settled at the kitchen table with her laptop. Her fingers trembled slightly as she connected her camera and began transferring the day's photographs. Ordinary factory machinery interspersed with damning evidence of government malfeasance. She created multiple backups, one on a USB drive. She would hide in their apartment, another uploaded to a password-protected cloud account, and a third sent to her personal email with an innocuous subject line. Preparation born of professional caution rather than paranoia, though the line between the two had blurred considerably in the past 24 hours. As the files transferred, Mei researched Project Riverflow and Clearwater Protocol, finding nothing but conspiracy theory forums and dead ends. Whatever had happened at Westmore Manufacturing remained officially undocumented in public records. She expanded her search to include Walter Westmore, discovering that after the factory's closure, he had indeed relocated to Washington, D.C., where he served as a special consultant to the Department of Defense until his death in 1986. The official obituary mentioned his dedicated government service and contributions to national security, but offered no specifics. More telling was what it didn't mention: his decades running Westmore Manufacturing, the company his grandfather had founded. It was as if that entire chapter of his life had been deliberately omitted from his public legacy. A soft knock at the apartment door startled Mei from her research. It was nearly midnight, far too late for casual visitors. She approached cautiously, checking the peephole to find Mrs. Patel, their elderly neighbor, standing in the hallway in her nightgown and robe. "I'm so sorry to disturb you," Mrs. Patel whispered when Mei opened the door. "But a man was asking questions about you earlier today. Very official-looking, dark suit, government type." Mei's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About your schedule when you come and go. He claimed to be from some health department survey, but it felt..." Mrs. Patel trailed off, her weathered face creased with concern. "It felt wrong. I told him I knew nothing, of course." "Thank you," Mei said, genuinely grateful for the warning and her neighbor's protective instinct. "Did he leave a card or name?" Mrs. Patel shook her head. "Nothing. Just left when I wouldn't answer his questions. I thought you should know." After her neighbor departed, Mei double-checked the apartment's locks, a futile gesture against whatever forces might be mobilizing in response to her discoveries. Sleep came in restless fragments, punctuated by dreams of numbered workers and contaminated rivers. Morning arrived with heavy rain and a text message from Mrs. Delacourt. "Historical Society Board meeting today. Factory access may be limited. Perhaps take the day to organize your notes." The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Had they somehow discovered her exploration of the basement laboratory? Was Stefan's document removal part of a larger sanitization effort happening today? Mei texted back, "Already on my way. Need to photograph East Wing machinery today. Won't disturb meeting." A calculated risk, but she needed to continue gathering evidence before it disappeared. She roused Lily, prepared a quick breakfast, and arranged for Mrs. Patel to take her to school, explaining she needed to start work early. The elderly woman agreed readily, her eyes communicating wordless understanding of urgency without details. The walk to Westmer Manufacturing felt different this morning, exposed, vulnerable. Mei found herself checking over her shoulder, scanning, passing vehicles, noticing details she would normally overlook. The weight of her camera and documentation in her backpack seemed to grow with each step. The factory's main entrance was locked when she arrived, despite the early hour. Mei used her key, slipping inside quietly and listening for voices that might indicate the board meeting was underway. The building remained silent, except for the perpetual drip of rainwater through aging roof sections. Rather than heading directly to the R&D area, Mei began work in the Eastern Wing as she'd told Mrs. Delacourt, photographing machinery and making notes with deliberate thoroughness. Professional camouflage, the dedicated inventory specialist, focused solely on her assigned task. Around mid-morning, voices echoed from the entrance hall. Mei continued her work, straining to hear the conversation. "Needs to be contained," a male voice she didn't recognize was saying. "The integrity of the historical record must be balanced against national security considerations." "The inventory specialist has made significant progress," Mrs. Delacourt replied. "Her documentation is quite thorough." "Too thorough?" the man asked sharply. "Unclear at this point. Stefan is concerned about her interest in certain areas." Their voices faded as they moved toward the administrative offices on the mezzanine. Mei remained in the Eastern Wing, documenting machinery with heightened attention to detail, waiting for an opportunity to return to the basement laboratory. That opportunity came shortly before noon, when she observed a group of 5 people. Mrs. Delacour, 3 men in dark suits, and Stefan exiting the building together. Their body language suggested tension, particularly between Stefan and one of the suited men. Mei waited 10 minutes to ensure they had truly departed, then made her way to the R&D door. The padlock opened smoothly with the same key, and she descended the stairwell with greater confidence than yesterday, driven by purpose rather than mere curiosity. The basement laboratory appeared unchanged at first glance. Workstations with their mysterious equipment, central testing tables, rows of filing cabinets. But closer inspection revealed subtle differences. Certain cabinets stood slightly ajar. Folders had been rearranged, equipment positions shifted minutely. Someone had been here, systematically reviewing and potentially removing evidence. Mei headed directly to the storage room, finding the combination lock still functional with the same sequence. Inside, the shelving units with their labeled containers remained intact, but the safe at the back wall, the one containing the most damning Project Riverflow documentation, was now closed and locked. A significant setback, but not insurmountable. Mei had already photographed the safe's contents yesterday, capturing the evidence of water supply testing and Walter Westmore's apparent crisis of conscience. She turned her attention to the remaining storage room containers, documenting their hazard warnings and classification codes with methodical precision. One container in particular caught her attention. A metal case labeled Riverflow Longitudinal Analysis, 1972-2022. The dates suggested continued monitoring long after the factory's closure. Inside, Mei found water testing results, medical statistics, and cancer cluster analyses for Riverdale neighborhoods, organized by proximity to the river. The documentation painted a devastating picture: elevated rates of specific cancers, neurological disorders, and birth defects in riverside communities for 50 years following the factory's closure. Most damning was a cost-benefit analysis comparing projected legal settlements to remediation expenses, with a clear recommendation to maintain containment protocol rather than pursue full disclosure and cleanup. They had known, for 50 years, Someone had tracked the ongoing health impacts of whatever chemicals Westmore Manufacturing had introduced into the river, weighing financial liability against human suffering and choosing the cheaper option. Mei photographed everything, hands steady despite the emotional turmoil within. Her husband had grown up in the riverside neighborhood most severely affected, according to these reports. His rare, aggressive cancer appeared frequently in the longitudinal health data. The connection could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. As she worked, a new understanding crystallized. This wasn't just historical documentation, it was evidence of ongoing criminal negligence. The Historical Society was likely a front for whatever government entity had inherited responsibility for Project Riverflow, an entity still actively concealing the truth rather than addressing the continuing contamination. Mei had nearly finished photographing the longitudinal analysis when a sound from the laboratory beyond froze her in place, the R&D door opening at the top of the stairwell. Footsteps descended, unhurried but purposeful. She quickly replaced the container, closed the storage room door until only a narrow gap remained, and positioned herself to observe whoever had returned. Stefan entered the laboratory alone, moving directly to a workstation that appeared unremarkable compared to the others. He knelt beside it, reaching underneath to manipulate something Mei couldn't see. With a mechanical click, a section of the workstation's surface slid aside, revealing a hidden compartment. From this concealed space, Stefan removed a thick binder and several small metal containers. He placed these in his ever-present canvas bag, then restored the workstation to its original appearance, leaving no visible evidence of the hidden compartment. As he turned to leave, his gaze swept the laboratory one final time and landed directly on the storage room door, where Mei watched through the narrow gap. Stefan's weathered face revealed no surprise, only resignation, as if he had expected this confrontation eventually. "You might as well come out, Ms. Rivera," he called. "We need to talk." Mei considered her options, found them limited, and pushed the door open. "Those aren't historical society materials you're collecting." "No," Stefan agreed, making no move to hide his canvas bag. "They're insurance." "Against what?" "Against people who believe the past should stay buried, regardless of ongoing consequences." The statement hung between them, weighted with implications. Mei gestured toward his bag. "What's in the hidden compartment?" "Walter Westmore's private records, his evidence against Project Riverflow, and his attempts to shut it down." Stefan studied her for a long moment. "You've been in the storage room. You've seen the longitudinal analysis." It wasn't a question, but Mei nodded anyway. 50 years of documented health impacts, including cancer clusters that likely killed my husband. Something in Stefan's expression shifted. Professional. Caution giving way to genuine regret. "I'm sorry, truly." "Sorry doesn't help the people still getting sick," Mei said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Sorry doesn't change the fact that someone is still monitoring the contamination without addressing it." "No, it doesn't." Stefan adjusted the canvas bag on his shoulder, which is why Walter started collecting evidence and why I've continued after his death. The revelation momentarily silenced Mei. "You're not just the caretaker. I'm the caretaker of many things, including Walter's legacy. He hired me to maintain this building for one purpose, to preserve the evidence until someone could use it effectively. Use it how? To force accountability, to compel cleanup and compensation." Stefan's expression hardened. "Walter tried, going through official channels in 1972. His concerns were dismissed, the factory was shut down to contain the situation, and he was relocated to Washington where they could monitor him. He played along, biding his time, collecting evidence from inside the system. Mei processed this information, connecting it with her research from the night before. But he died in 1986. What happened to his evidence? Some was confiscated. Some was hidden here, in places only I know about. Stefan patted his canvas bag, and now the Historical Society is preparing to acquire and renovate this building, eliminating the last repository of physical evidence. The Historical Society isn't real, Mei said, confirming her suspicion. Oh, it's real enough, just infiltrated and directed by people with specific interests in Westmore's history, people who've spent 50 years managing this contamination as a liability issue rather than a human tragedy. Mei thought of Mrs. Delacourt's elegant manner, her careful instructions to document everything thoroughly. Does Mrs. Delacourt know what's happening? Eleanor Delacourt serves many masters, Stefan replied cryptically. The question is, Ms. Rivera, what do you plan to do with what you've discovered? The directness of the question demanded equal honesty. Document everything, protect the evidence, find someone who can use it to help the people still suffering. Stefan nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then we have aligned interests. Do we? Mei wasn't ready to trust so easily. You've been removing documents before I could catalogue them. Protecting them, he corrected. The official inventory will be reviewed and sanitized before becoming public. Anything truly damning would disappear during that process. It made a certain sense, though suspicion lingered. Why tell me this now? Because you've gone looking for the truth rather than just completing your assigned task. Because you've connected your personal loss to what happened here. Stefan checked his watch. And because in approximately 3 hours, the containment team will arrive to begin preparation for renovation, which will include removing anything sensitive under the guise of structural assessment. Today, Mei felt a surge of urgency. I need more time to document everything. Time is precisely what they've decided not to give you. Stefan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small key. There's a records room on the 3rd floor behind the executive offices. Most assume it contains duplicate administrative files, but Walter used it to store his personal documentation of Project Riverflow. This key opens the locked cabinet in the northwest corner. Mei accepted the key, its weight seemingly disproportionate to its size. Why help me? Why take the risk? I made a promise to Walter to preserve the evidence until someone could use it effectively. Stefan adjusted his canvas bag again. I'm 83 years old, Ms. Rivera. I've watched 3 generations of Riverside children develop cancers and neurological disorders. I've attended hundreds of funerals for factory workers and their families. I've kept my promise for nearly 50 years, but I can't be the caretaker forever. The weight of his words settled over the laboratory, momentarily drowning out the perpetual drip of rainwater from above. Mei squared her shoulders, decision crystallizing. 3 hours isn't much time. No, Stefan agreed, it isn't. I'll create a distraction when they arrive. Direct attention away from the 3rd floor as long as possible. What about your safety? Won't they suspect you're involved? A smile creased Stefan's weathered face. I've been playing the part of the cooperative but slightly confused old caretaker for decades. They underestimate me precisely because I've allowed them to. With that, he departed, canvas bag secure on his shoulder, leaving Mei alone in the basement laboratory, surrounded by evidence of calculated harm inflicted on her community. She worked with focused intensity for the next hour, documenting everything she could access in the laboratory and storage room. When nothing remained untouched, she made her way back upstairs and headed directly to the 3rd floor records room Stefan had identified. The room appeared unremarkable, windowless, lined with filing cabinets and shelves of bound ledgers. The locked cabinet in the northwest corner looked identical to dozens of others throughout the building. Stefan's key turned smoothly in its lock, revealing contents unlike anything Mei had expected. Rather than files or documents, the cabinet contained technical equipment, a camera with multiple memory cards, a small recording device, several hard drives, and a notebook filled with handwritten entry codes and passwords. A note attached to the camera read simply, "Evidence for Justice, WWW." Walter Westmore had created a digital archive long before such technology was commonplace, systematically documenting Project Riverflow and its aftermath for future disclosure. Mei carefully examined each component, finding the camera's memory, cards filled with photographs of the basement laboratory in operation, workers in protective gear handling chemical compounds, and testing equipment connected directly to municipal water system components. The hard drives contained scanned documents, research data, and what appeared to be personnel files for the numbered employees, their real names, medical histories, and in many cases, subsequent health complications. Most valuable was a video, file labeled Final Testimony, dated just weeks before Walter Westmore's death in 1986. Mei connected the recording device to her laptop and watched as Walter Westmore's face filled the screen, older than the photographs she'd seen, gaunt with illness but eyes burning with purpose. "My name is Walter Westmore," he began, voice steady despite his apparent weakness. "From 1952 to 1972, I directed operations at Westmore Manufacturing in Riverdale, including classified research conducted under Department of Defense contracts. This testimony serves as my confession and my attempt at atonement for actions I initially believed served national security, but which I now recognize as unconscionable violations of human rights and environmental stewardship." What followed was a 90-minute confession detailing Project Riverflow's evolution from theoretical research into practical application, using Riverdale's water system as a testing ground. Walter described how government agencies had selected the location specifically because the factory's dominance of the local economy would discourage questions or opposition. "I believed the assurances that concentrations were too low to cause harm," Walter continued, his face reflecting genuine remorse. "When evidence of health impacts became impossible to ignore, I attempted to terminate the project. Instead, operations were simply taken from my control. The factory was closed, and I was relocated to Washington, where my cooperation was secured through a combination of legal threats and promises to implement safeguards for Riverdale residents." His voice strengthened with anger. Those safeguards never materialized. Monitoring continued, but only to document rather than address the continuing contamination. Cost analyses replaced moral considerations. When I pressed the issue, I was systematically marginalized until my security clearance was insufficient to access my own project's data. The testimony concluded with a direct appeal. "To whoever discovers this evidence, it was preserved at great risk by those who believe accountability must eventually triumph over secrecy. Use it to secure justice for the people of Riverdale, who never consented to become test subjects and who continue to bear the health burden of our moral failure." The video ended with Walter Westmore's gaunt face staring into the camera as if trying to reach across decades to whoever might eventually view his confession. Mei sat motionless, processing the enormity of what she had discovered, not just evidence of historical wrongdoing, but testimony from the man responsible, created specifically to support future justice efforts. Walter Westmore had turned whistleblower in the most methodical, far-sighted way possible, creating and preserving evidence that could withstand both time and intentional suppression. The sound of vehicles arriving outside broke Mei's contemplation. She checked her watch. The containment team had arrived earlier than Stefan had predicted. Through the third-floor window, she observed 3 unmarked vans and a black SUV parking near the main entrance. Men in casual attire that failed to disguise their military bearing emerged, converging on the building with purposeful efficiency. Mei worked quickly, copying Walter's digital archive onto her own laptop and backup drives. The process seemed agonizingly slow, the progress bar advancing incrementally, while voices echoed from the floors below. Stefan was speaking loudly, his tone suggesting he was leading the new arrivals on a tour of the ground floor, the promised distraction. When the data transfer finally completed, Mei carefully returned the equipment to the cabinet, locking it, and pocketing the key. She couldn't remove Walter's original evidence. Its disappearance would immediately trigger suspicion. But she now possessed complete copies of his meticulously preserved archive. The voices below grew louder. Footsteps on the stairs, suggesting the containment team was expanding their inspection to the upper floors. Mei gathered her documentation and moved toward the back stairwell, the one she had discovered connected. The executive offices to the loading dock area, a discreet exit route. As she descended, a fragment of conversation reached her from the main staircase, Mrs. Delacourt's voice, tense with suppressed urgency. Priority is securing the basement laboratory and all related documentation before the inventory specialist returns. The timetable has accelerated. And if she's already found something, a male voice responded, then we'll handle that complication appropriately. The implied threat propelled Mei down the back stairs with renewed urgency. She exited through the loading dock, circling the building to avoid the parked vehicles, and began the long walk back toward town through steady rain that provided welcome concealment. By the time she reached the community college library for her afternoon shift, Mei had formulated the beginnings of a plan. She needed legal assistance from someone who couldn't be easily intimidated, journalistic contacts who could publicize the evidence if official channels failed, and most importantly, a secure location for both the documentation and herself, and Lily until the situation stabilized. Gloria, her supervisor, took one look at Mei's rain-soaked appearance and drawn face and ushered her into the break room. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Mei replied, accepting the offered coffee with gratitude. "Just the past, catching up to the present in ways I wasn't prepared for." "Cryptic," Gloria observed. "Does it have something to do with that inventory job, the one at the old Westmore factory?" Mei hesitated, weighing trust against caution. Gloria had been a pillar of the community for decades, serving as the library's head reference specialist and unofficial town historian. If anyone might have relevant context for what she'd discovered, it would be Gloria. "What do you know about Westmore manufacturing? Not the official history, but what people said when the factory closed in 1972. Gloria's expression shifted, concern replacing curiosity. "Why do you ask?" "I found something during the inventory, something that might explain a lot about Riverdale's health problems over the past 50 years. The older woman was silent for a long moment, seemingly weighing her words. Finally, she said, "My brother worked at Westmore, in what they called the research division. He died of a brain tumor in 1975, 3 years after the closure, 38 years old, no family history of cancer." The information hung between them, confirmation of patterns Mei had discovered in Walter Westmore's evidence. "There were dozens like him," Gloria continued. "Factory workers who got sick and died young. Too many to be coincidence, but no one could prove anything. Westmore was gone, the government denied any connection, and eventually people stopped asking questions." She studied Mei intently. "Until now, apparently." Mei made a decision. "I need help, Gloria. I found evidence that Westmore was conducting chemical testing through Riverdale's water supply under government contract. Evidence that they've been monitoring the health impacts for 50 years without addressing the contamination or compensating victims." Gloria's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of her shock. That would explain a lot. It would explain my husband's cancer, and your brother's, and hundreds of others." Mei leaned forward. "But the people responsible are moving to contain the evidence. Today, right now. What do you need?" "A lawyer who can't be intimidated. Someone to protect the evidence and help build a case. Gloria didn't hesitate. My nephew Daniel, environmental law with a focus on corporate accountability, based in Boston, but licensed in this state. He's been trying to establish a pattern in Riverdale's cancer clusters for years, looking for a legal angle. Can you call him today? I'll do better than that. Gloria pulled out her phone. I'll get him here tomorrow. But May, these people, if they're who I think they are, they won't just let this go. You're putting yourself at risk. I know, May acknowledged, the weight of her decision settling fully on her shoulders. But what's the alternative? Let them continue hiding the truth while people keep getting sick? My husband is gone. Lily will grow up without her father. Your brother died at 38. How many more families have to be destroyed before someone says enough? Gloria reached across the table, covering May's hand with her own. I've worked in this library for 45 years. I've watched this town struggle with illness rates no one could explain. I've attended too many funerals for people who died too young. Whatever you've found, whatever you need to protect it, I'm with you. The simple declaration of solidarity brought unexpected tears to May's eyes. Since her husband's death, she had carried their financial burdens alone, navigated single parenthood, alone, faced each crisis alone. The prospect of an ally, someone who understood both the personal and community stakes, was overwhelming. Thank you, she managed, but there's Lily to consider. If these people realize what I've found... My sister's lake house, Gloria said decisively. 2 hours north, isolated, well-stocked. She only uses it in summer. You and Lily go there tonight, lock down and wait for Daniel to arrive tomorrow. Give me the evidence, and I'll get it to him when he gets here. May hesitated. It's not that simple. I'm supposed to bring Lily to the factory this weekend to help with the inventory. If we disappear immediately after I access the restricted areas, then we need a plausible reason for your sudden departure. Gloria thought for a moment. Lily gets sick at school. You have to pick her up, take her home. By morning, it's clear she needs medical attention, so you take her to your sister's near the lake, where the rural air will help her recover. The scenario was neat, logical, and most importantly, verifiable through ordinary channels. That could work, but I'll need to actually go to the school and pick her up for the story to hold. I'll call right now, explain that you had a family emergency and need to get Lily immediately. As far as the school is concerned, it will be completely routine. As Gloria made the call, May prepared a copy of Walter Westmore's digital archive and her own documentation for handoff. The evidence was now backed up in multiple locations, protecting against any single point of failure. Within the hour, May had collected Lily from school, returned to their apartment to pack essential items, under the guise of a normal overnight trip, and loaded their meager luggage into Gloria's car for the drive to the lake house. As they prepared to leave, May cast one final glance at the apartment building, wondering if she would ever return, or if this moment marked another abrupt transition in their already disrupted lives. The eviction notice still waited on her kitchen counter. The broken-down truck still sat in the parking lot, mundane problems now overshadowed by the discovery of long-buried secrets and the responsibility that came with them. Ready for an adventure? She asked Lily, forcing brightness into her voice. Is it part of your treasure hunt at the factory? Lily asked, her expression suggesting she sensed the underlying tension despite May's efforts to shield her. Something like that, May replied, helping her into Gloria's back seat. Sometimes treasures come with unexpected responsibilities. As they drove away from Riverdale, heading north toward temporary sanctuary, May watched the familiar landscape recede. In the side mirror, what had begun as a desperate grasp at financial salvation had transformed into something far more significant. A chance to expose decades of deliberate harm, to secure justice for hundreds of families, to transform her community's understanding of its own history. The rain continued to fall, washing the world clean as they drove toward an uncertain future, carrying evidence that could no longer remain buried and truth that would no longer be denied. The lake house materialized through sheets of rain as darkness fell, a weathered A-frame perched on a small bluff overlooking water that vanished into the gloom. Gloria's directions had led them along increasingly narrow roads until pavement surrendered to gravel, civilization giving way to wilderness. The isolation that might once have felt threatening now offered sanctuary. "It's like a fairy tale cottage," Lily whispered as they approached, her imagination transforming the utilitarian vacation home into something magical. Despite the circumstances, Mei smiled at her daughter's resilience, the ability to find wonder even in flight. The key was exactly where Gloria had said it would be, tucked beneath a false rock beside the front steps. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and disuse, a musty welcome that spoke of seasonal abandonment. Mei flipped light switches, grateful when ancient fixtures sputtered to life. "Can we stay here forever?" Lily asked, exploring the open main room with its stone fireplace and wall of windows facing the lake. "It's way bigger than our apartment." "Not forever," Mei answered carefully, "but for a little while, yes." While Lily continued her exploration, Mei secured the perimeter, checking locks, noting potential vulnerabilities, placing Gloria's car in the small shed behind the house where it wouldn't be visible from the access road. Security measures that would have seemed paranoid 2 days ago now felt woefully inadequate. Her phone chimed with a text from Gloria. "Daniel arriving noon tomorrow. Called Mrs. Delacourt, told her you had family emergency. Lily sick." She seemed to accept explanation. "Stay safe." The terse message offered minimal reassurance. If Mrs. Delacourt and her containment team discovered what Mei had accessed, Walter's testimony, the longitudinal health data, the evidence of ongoing monitoring, a family emergency wouldn't explain her sudden departure. After a simple dinner cobbled together from the lake house's stock of non-perishables, Mei helped Lily prepare for bed in the small loft that overlooked the main room. The girl fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the day's unexpected adventure and comforted by her mother's presence nearby. Mei settled at the kitchen table with her laptop, reviewing Walter Westmore's digital archive with greater attention now that immediate escape had been accomplished. The evidence was more damning than she had initially realized. A 50-year conspiracy of silence that had sacrificed public health for government convenience and corporate profit. Walter's video testimony detailed how Project Riverflow had begun as a theoretical exercise in water supply security, developing methods to protect municipal systems from tampering or contamination. But under pressure from military and intelligence agencies during the Cold War, the research had evolved into something darker, testing how effectively various chemical compounds could be distributed through existing water infrastructure. Riverdale had been selected specifically because Westmore manufacturing dominated the local economy, providing a population unlikely to question strange activities at the factory and dependent enough on its continued operation to discourage official inquiries. The numbered employees, those with special security clearances and compartmentalized knowledge, had monitored the testing, collected health data, and maintained the secrecy that allowed the program to continue for years. When evidence of health impacts became impossible to ignore, Walter had attempted to terminate the project. Instead, control had been removed from his hands, the factory closed to eliminate the most visible evidence, and operations shifted to long-term monitoring rather than immediate remediation. Most disturbing were the longitudinal health studies showing clear statistical connections between proximity to the river and specific medical conditions. Connections that could not be explained by lifestyle, genetics, or other environmental factors. The government had known for decades that Riverdale's elevated cancer rates, neurological disorders, and birth defects stemmed directly from Project Riverflow, yet had chosen containment over cleanup, secrecy over accountability. Mei's hands trembled as she compiled these findings into a comprehensive document, organizing the evidence chronologically and highlighting the clearest connections between the chemical testing and subsequent health impacts. This wasn't just historical documentation, it was the foundation for legal action that could finally bring justice to Riverdale's suffering population. When her eyes grew too heavy to continue, Mei backed up her work, secured the laptop, and settled on the sofa near the fireplace. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of contaminated water and numbered workers, whose faces morphed into her husband's as they succumbed to mysterious illnesses. Dawn broke with surprising clarity, the previous day's rain giving way to crystalline light that transformed the lake into a mirror. Mei stood at the wall of windows, watching mist rise from the water's surface, struck by the contrast between this pristine landscape and Riverdale's poisoned river. Lily joined her, hair tousled from sleep, eyes wide with childish wonder at the view. "It's beautiful," she whispered, as if speaking normally might shatter the perfect stillness. "Yes," Mei agreed, placing an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "This is what water should look like. Clean, safe." They spent the morning exploring the lake house's immediate surroundings, staying within sight of the building, but allowing Lily the freedom to collect pine cones, spot wildlife, and experience nature uncontaminated by urban development. Mei maintained vigilant awareness of their isolation, checking her phone periodically for messages from Gloria while keeping watch for any approaching vehicles. Shortly before noon, the crunch of tires on gravel announced an arrival. Mei ushered Lily inside, watching through the front window as a mud-spattered SUV parked beside the house. A man emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, with Gloria's unmistakable eyes in a younger face. "Daniel Chen," he introduced himself at the door, presenting identification before Mei would admit him. "Gloria's nephew, environmental attorney with Blackwood, and Chen in Boston." His caution in establishing identity matched Mei's own wariness, a promising sign. Once inside, Daniel placed his briefcase on the kitchen table and fixed Mei with an evaluating gaze. "My aunt says you found evidence of chemical testing in Riverdale's water supply. Evidence that could explain the cancer clusters I've been tracking for 6 years. "Yes," Mei confirmed, retrieving her laptop. "Project Riverflow. Department of Defense research conducted through Westmore Manufacturing from the 1950s through 1972, with ongoing monitoring of health impacts continuing to the present day." Daniel's professional demeanor momentarily cracked. "You have documentation of ongoing monitoring, current contamination?" "Everything," Mei confirmed, opening the laptop to display Walter Westmore's digital archive, including video testimony from Walter Westmore himself, recorded shortly before his death in 1986. For the next hour, while Lily entertained herself with books from the lake house's modest library, Mei walked Daniel through the evidence she had discovered: chemical formulas, testing protocols, health impact data, and Walter's comprehensive confession. Daniel took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting specific documents, his initial skepticism gradually transforming into focused determination. "This is..." He paused, searching for adequate words. "This is the most comprehensive evidence of environmental crimes I've ever encountered." Walter Westmore essentially created a turnkey legal case against his own company and the government agencies involved. "Can you use it?" Mei asked, the question that had driven her actions since discovering the archive. "Absolutely. This establishes clear liability for decades of contamination and deliberate concealment. Daniel's expression hardened. But utilizing it effectively requires careful strategy. These entities have spent 50 years and considerable resources hiding this information. They won't simply surrender when confronted. There are people already moving to contain the evidence, Mei explained, describing the historical society and their apparent connection to whatever government agency had inherited responsibility for Project Riverflow. They were removing documents from the factory yesterday. They know someone accessed restricted areas. Do they know it was you specifically? I'm not certain. I left before direct confrontation, but the timing of my departure immediately after accessing Walter's archive would be suspicious. Daniel nodded, processing this information. Then we need to assume they're looking for you, which means we need to move quickly but carefully. This type of case requires multiple layers of protection: legal, media, and physical security. What do you recommend? First, we secure the evidence beyond their reach. Daniel withdrew a secure external drive from his briefcase. This goes into my firm's protected document system, accessible only with multi-factor authentication and monitored continuously for unauthorized access attempts. As Mei transferred Walter's archive to the secure drive, Daniel continued outlining his strategy. Second, we prepare filings for both federal court and state environmental agencies, documenting the contamination and demanding immediate remediation. The legal pressure creates official scrutiny that makes further concealment more difficult. And third, he said, his tone shifting to reflect increased gravity, we create public accountability through carefully managed media exposure, not a dramatic reveal all at once, but strategic disclosure to trusted journalists who understand the sensitivity and potential danger. Danger? Lily asked from the doorway, where she had apparently been listening. Her small face showed confusion and concern. Mom, are we in danger? May's heart clenched at her daughter's frightened expression. She had tried to shield Lily from the full implications of their situation, maintaining the fiction of a simple adventure rather than a necessary escape. Before she could formulate a reassuring response, Daniel knelt to Lily's level, his voice gentle but honest. Sometimes when people discover important truths, other people try to keep those truths hidden. Your mom found something very important that can help a lot of people in Riverdale, including kids just like you. Lily considered this explanation, her brow furrowed in concentration. Like when Tyler Henderson stole money from the classroom fund, and Jasmine saw him but was scared to tell because Tyler said he'd hurt her. Something like that, Daniel agreed, except much bigger and affecting many more people. Jasmine told anyway, Lily said firmly, because it was the right thing to do, even though she was scared. The simple moral clarity of an 8-year-old cut through layers of adult complexity. Mei felt a surge of pride in her daughter's innate understanding of ethical courage. That's exactly right, Mei confirmed, drawing Lily into a hug. And that's what we're doing too, telling the truth even though it's scary, because it's the right thing to do. Daniel watched this exchange with appreciation before returning to practical matters. The immediate question is your safety until legal proceedings create official protection. Gloria mentioned you were supposed to return to the factory this weekend. Yes, to continue the inventory. If I don't appear or communicate, it will confirm their suspicions. Then we need a credible communication that buys time without revealing your location. Daniel thought for a moment. A message to Mrs. Delacourt, explaining that Lily's condition requires medical attention away from Riverdale, but that you'll resume the inventory as soon as possible. Would they believe that? It doesn't matter if they believe it, Daniel explained. "What matters is creating an official record of reasonable explanation for your absence. It complicates any attempt to portray you as someone who accessed restricted areas and then fled with stolen information." The strategy made sense. Mei composed a message to Mrs. Delacourt, explaining that Lily's sudden illness required consultation with a specialist in a neighboring city, apologizing for the unexpected absence and promising to resume the inventory early next week. The deliberately vague medical concern and unspecified location offered plausible deniability without providing trackable details. After sending the message, Mei turned back to Daniel. "What happens next?" "I file emergency motions in federal court today, seeking immediate protection orders for both the evidence and you as the whistleblower who discovered it. Simultaneously, I contact the State Environmental Protection Agency and the EPA with formal notifications of ongoing contamination requiring urgent intervention." He paused, seemingly weighing his next words carefully. "I also activate certain journalistic connections, people who specialize in government accountability reporting and have the institutional backing to withstand pressure." "How long before this becomes public?" Mei asked, thinking of Riverdale's residents still drinking contaminated water, still developing cancers and neurological disorders at elevated rates. "We can have preliminary legal filings completed by Monday morning. Initial media coverage could begin by Tuesday, but full public disclosure of the evidence, including Walter Westmore's testimony, that will take longer to coordinate effectively. And every day means more exposure for people who don't know they're at risk," Mei pointed out. "I understand the urgency," Daniel assured her, "but rushing this could compromise both the legal case and your safety. We need the protection of official proceedings and public awareness before those responsible realize exactly what you've discovered." The lake house's landline phone rang, startling all of them. Gloria had mentioned it existed, but warned it was rarely used. Mei approached it cautiously, activating the speakerphone function rather than picking up the handset. "Hello? Mei, it's Gloria. Are you somewhere secure where you can talk?" "Yes, we're at the lake house with Daniel. You're on speaker." "Good." Gloria's voice sounded tense, almost brittle. "There are men at the library asking questions about you. Not local police, federal types with official ID, but vague explanations. They're saying it's about materials removed from a historical site and potential national security concerns." Daniel moved closer to the phone. "Have they presented any warrants or specific allegations?" "No warrants," Gloria confirmed. "Just questions about Mei's whereabouts, her relationship to the Westmore factory, whether she's mentioned finding anything unusual." "I played dumb, said I knew she was doing inventory work, but nothing about her findings." "Good," Daniel approved. "Without specific legal documentation, you have no obligation to provide information." "There's more," Gloria continued. "Stefan Novak was taken into custody this morning. They're calling it questioning related to unauthorized access of government property, but he was escorted from his caretaker's cottage in handcuffs." Mei's stomach tightened. Stefan had created a distraction to facilitate her escape, and now he was paying the price for that assistance. The elderly caretaker who had maintained Walter Westmore's evidence for decades was now vulnerable to whatever pressure these agencies might apply. "Can you help him?" she asked Daniel. "I can try," he replied. "If they're holding him without charges, there are legal remedies. But first I need to establish the foundation of our case, the evidence of contamination and deliberate concealment. That creates the context for understanding Stefan's actions as legitimate whistleblowing rather than unauthorized access." Gloria's voice returned, more urgent. "There's something else you should know. They visited the school too, asking about Lily, about your family situation, about any recent unusual behavior. The information sent ice through Mei's veins. They were establishing a profile, creating a narrative that could be used to discredit her if the evidence became public. The struggling single mother, financially desperate, potentially unstable. That changes our timeline, Daniel said decisively. We need to file the initial motions today, not Monday. Get protection orders in place before they can escalate further. He turned to Mei. I'll need to leave immediately to make the court deadline, but I don't think you and Lily should stay here alone. They can come with me, Gloria suggested through the phone. My sister's in Florida for the season. No one would connect her house to me immediately, and it's in the opposite direction from the lake. Daniel nodded approval. That's good strategy. Different vehicle, different location, no obvious connection to either Mei or me. The rapid shift in plans created practical complications. What about Daniel's secure drive? Mei asked. Doesn't he need that for the court filings? I've got what I need, Daniel assured her, patting his briefcase. The secure drive is redundancy, protection against single points of failure. You keep it with you as insurance. The decision made, they moved with efficient purpose. Gathering Lily's few belongings, securing the lake house to remove evidence of their presence, transferring essential documentation to vehicles for the separate journeys. Within 30 minutes, they were prepared to depart. As Mei helped Lily into Gloria's borrowed sedan, the girl looked up with solemn eyes that reflected understanding beyond her years. Mom, are we like those people in your history books? The ones who had to be brave when big things were happening? The question pierced Mei's heart with its innocent profundity. Throughout history, ordinary people had found themselves at extraordinary crossroads, forced to choose between comfortable silence and dangerous truth. She had never imagined joining their ranks, never anticipated that inventory work in an abandoned factory would thrust her into confrontation with powerful interests determined to maintain decades of deception. Yes, she answered, kneeling to meet her daughter's gaze directly. We're exactly like those people. Sometimes history asks regular people to stand up for what's right, even when it's frightening. Like Dad would have done, Lily said with certainty, just like Dad. Mei blinked back unexpected tears. Her husband had possessed an unwavering moral compass, a clarity about right and wrong that had sometimes seemed naively absolute in a world of compromises. Now she found herself channeling that same clarity, that same certainty, that truth mattered more than convenience or safety. Daniel approached, keys in hand, expression reflecting both determination and concern. The legal machinery will be in motion by this evening. Protection orders, evidence preservation requirements, preliminary injunctions against any retaliation. But the most critical protection will be public awareness. Once this story begins to emerge, it becomes exponentially more difficult for them to suppress it. How will we know when it's safe to return home? Mei asked. When federal environmental teams are visibly testing Riverdale's water supply, when news crews are interviewing long-time residents about health concerns, when congressional representatives are demanding investigations. Daniel's expression softened slightly. When the truth becomes impossible to contain, protecting it becomes unnecessary. As they prepared to depart in separate directions, Daniel toward federal court, Mei and Lily with Gloria toward temporary sanctuary, Mei felt a strange sense of clarity amidst the chaos. The past 3 days had transformed her understanding of her husband's death, her community's suffering, and her own capacity for courage in the face of intimidation. What had begun as desperate financial necessity, a simple inventory job to avoid eviction, had evolved into something far more profound. The chance to expose half a century of calculated harm inflicted on unsuspecting citizens, to demand accountability From institutions that had prioritized secrecy over human lives to transform her personal tragedy into catalyst for community healing. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with legal battles and potential danger. Powerful interests would fight to discredit the evidence, to minimize their liability, to maintain the containment that had protected them for decades. But for the first time since her husband's diagnosis had shattered their carefully constructed life, Mei felt something beyond survival instinct. A sense of purpose that transcended daily struggle, a conviction that her actions mattered in ways that extended beyond her immediate family. As their vehicles departed in opposite directions, Mei watched the lake house recede in the rearview mirror, its peaceful isolation yielding to the demands of justice that could no longer be deferred. The path forward was uncertain, but the moral imperative was absolute. The truth about Project Riverflow would finally emerge from decades of deliberate darkness into the cleansing light of public accountability. In the back seat, Lily hummed softly to herself, somehow understanding that their journey had significance beyond an unexpected adventure. Mei reached back to squeeze her daughter's hand, drawing strength from the connection that had sustained her through grief and hardship. Together, they drove toward an uncertain future, carrying evidence that could no longer remain buried and truth that would no longer be denied. Behind them, Riverdale's contaminated river continued its slow poison, unaware that its deadly secret would soon be exposed by the most unlikely of champions. A struggling single mother who had simply needed work to keep her family housed, but had found instead a moral obligation that transcended personal survival. The wheels turned, carrying them forward, each mile increasing the distance between vulnerable truth-tellers and those who would silence them. In her pocket, the secure drive containing Walter Westmore's digital archive pressed against Mei's hip, a small weight bearing massive implications for justice, long delayed, but finally approaching. 6 months later, Mei stood at the podium in Riverdale's town hall, facing a room filled beyond capacity. Residents occupied every seat, lined the walls, and spilled into the corridor outside. Generations of families united by a shared history of unexplained illness and newfound understanding of its cause. Television cameras positioned at the back captured the historic moment, broadcasting to a national audience that had followed what media now called the Riverflow revelations with growing outrage. Project Riverflow was never just about water, Mei said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the occasion. It was about power, the power to experiment on citizens without consent, the power to conceal evidence when harm became apparent, the power to prioritize institutional protection over human lives for 50 years. She paused, surveying the audience. Faces reflected back a complex mixture of emotions, anger at decades of deception, grief for loved ones lost to unexplained illnesses, determination to secure justice long denied, and perhaps most powerfully, gratitude that the truth had finally emerged. But today, Mei continued, we reclaim that power. With the federal court's final approval of the settlement agreement, Riverdale begins a new chapter, one of healing, accountability, and transformation. The journey to this moment had been arduous, marked by legal battles, intimidation attempts, and personal sacrifice. But as Mei stood before her community as spokesperson for the class action lawsuit that had secured the largest environmental contamination settlement in state history, the cost seemed justified by the outcome. Behind her sat the key figures who had made this victory possible. Daniel Chen, whose legal strategy had withstood relentless challenges from government agencies and corporate lawyers. Gloria Reynolds, whose steadfast support had protected both evidence and witnesses during the critical early days. Stefan Novak, recently released from federal detention after charges of unauthorized access, were dismissed. and Lily, now 9 years old, who had demonstrated courage beyond her years throughout the tumultuous process. The settlement approved today includes 5 critical components, Mei explained, highlighting each point on the large screen behind her. First, comprehensive environmental remediation of the river and surrounding soil, supervised by independent experts and funded entirely by the responsible parties. Applause interrupted her presentation, the visceral response of a community that had lived alongside contaminated water for generations, watching children develop mysterious illnesses while officials dismissed their concerns as coincidence or hysteria. Second, the establishment of the Riverdale Health Monitoring Program, providing lifetime medical screening and treatment for all residents exposed to Project Riverflow contaminants, with special provisions for generational effects. More applause, accompanied by visible emotion from older attendees who had lost family members to cancers and neurological disorders that now had definitive explanation. Third, individual compensation for documented health impacts with streamlined claims processes that presume causation, rather than requiring victims to prove what the responsible parties concealed for decades. This announcement triggered the loudest response. Vindication for families who had depleted savings on medical treatments while being told there was no connection to environmental factors, no liability, no recourse. Fourth, declassification and public archiving of all Project Riverflow documentation, ensuring this history can never again be buried or denied. The audience's reaction reflected appreciation for transparency after generations of secrecy. Walter Westmore's methodically preserved evidence had ultimately fulfilled its purpose, transforming from hidden archive to public record accessible to researchers, journalists, and citizens seeking to understand their community's true history. And finally, Mei concluded, the establishment of the Riverdale Renewal Foundation, funded with $50 million to support community development, educational opportunities, and economic revitalization, acknowledging that the damage inflicted by Project Riverflow extended beyond physical health to encompass decades of economic stagnation and community trauma. As the audience rose in standing ovation, Mei reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. What had begun as desperate financial necessity, a simple inventory job to avoid eviction, had evolved into one of the most significant environmental justice victories in recent history. The path had not been smooth. After Daniel filed the initial court motions 6 months earlier, powerful interests had mobilized to contain the damage. Government agencies denied responsibility, citing statute of limitations and national security concerns. Corporate entities distanced themselves from Walter Westmore's actions, arguing that subsequent reorganizations had eliminated legal liability. Media outlets friendly to these interests attempted to portray Mei as an opportunistic troublemaker, even suggesting she had fabricated evidence for financial gain. Most troubling had been the direct intimidation, unmarked vehicles parked outside Gloria's sister's house, where Mei and Lily had taken refuge, suspicious technical problems with Daniel's law firm communications, even an anonymous phone call suggesting that Lily's safety depended on Mei's cooperation. But these efforts at suppression had ultimately backfired, thanks to Daniel's strategic approach to evidence disclosure. Rather than releasing Walter's archive all at once, creating a single vulnerability that could be attacked or discredited, he had implemented what he called cascading revelation, providing carefully selected documentation to multiple journalists, legal authorities, and environmental agencies in coordinated sequence. Each disclosure built upon previous revelations, creating a momentum of public awareness that became increasingly difficult to contain. When one avenue of investigation faced obstruction, 3 others continued advancing. When intimidation targeted one participant, others stepped forward to ensure continuity. The turning point came 3 months into the process when EPA testing confirmed current contamination levels in Riverdale's water supply that matched predictions from Walter Westmore's archived data. This independent verification transformed the narrative from historical wrongdoing to ongoing public health emergency, triggering mandatory remediation protocols that superseded attempts to maintain secrecy. Congressional hearings followed, with me providing testimony alongside environmental health experts, former government officials with knowledge of classified research programs, and Riverdale residents describing generations of unexplained illness patterns. The public outrage generated by these hearings created political pressure that ultimately forced settlement negotiations rather than continued legal resistance. As the town hall meeting transitioned to a community celebration, Mei stepped away from the podium to join Lily at a table near the refreshments. Her daughter was creating elaborate paper constructions with several other children, finding normality amid historic circumstances, as children so often managed to do. "You did good, Mom," Lily said without looking up from her folding. "Dad would be proud." The simple statement triggered unexpected emotion. Throughout the legal battles and public scrutiny, Mei had maintained professional composure, focusing on evidence and outcomes rather than personal impact. But Lily's mention of her father, whose death from aggressive cancer now had definitive explanation, cracked that carefully maintained facade. "I hope so," Mei managed, blinking back tears. "He is," Stefan said, appearing beside them with his customary quiet dignity. Walter would be too. The elderly caretaker had emerged from federal detention with enhanced moral authority rather than diminished credibility. His decades of preserving evidence while playing the role of confused old man had transformed from suspicious activity to heroic persistence once the full scope of Project Riverflow became public. Walter spent his final years trying to expose what had happened here, Stefan continued, lowering himself carefully into a chair beside them. He would consider this outcome worth every sacrifice. "Speaking of outcomes," Daniel interrupted, joining their table with a legal envelope in hand. "I have something for you, Mei." She accepted the envelope cautiously, having learned that legal documents often contain complications alongside victories. Inside was a deed transfer form, already completed with her name as the recipient property. "What is this?" she asked, scanning the unfamiliar address. "Walter Westmore's personal residence," Daniel explained. "A small house on 3 acres outside town. It was held in a trust with specific instructions that it be transferred to whoever finally exposed Project Riverflow to public accountability." But Mei stared at the document in disbelief. How is that possible? How could he have known someone would eventually discover his evidence?" "He didn't know who," Stefan clarified. "But he believed someone would eventually connect the patterns he had documented. The trust was his insurance policy, ensuring that whoever took the risk of exposure would have protection against the inevitable retaliation." The gesture from a man 50 years dead brought fresh perspective to Mei's understanding of moral courage. Walter Westmore had not only preserved evidence of wrongdoing he had once facilitated, he had actively prepared resources to protect future truth-tellers whose identities he could not know, but whose courage he had anticipated. "There's more," Daniel added, indicating additional documents in the envelope. "The property includes funds for maintenance and property taxes for the next 20 years. Walter wanted to ensure that financial pressure couldn't be used to undermine whoever finally broke the silence." The thoughtfulness of this provision, from someone who had never met her but had somehow understood the vulnerabilities that might be exploited, left Mei momentarily speechless. While she had been focused on immediate survival, Walter Westmore had been thinking generations ahead, creating mechanisms to support moral courage he would never witness. "Can we see it?" Lily asked, suddenly interested in the adult conversation. "Is it our new home?" "If you want it to be," Daniel confirmed. "The deed transfer is complete. The property is yours regardless of what you choose to do with it." Mei studied her daughter's hopeful expression. Their apartment still awaited them, though the eviction notice had been rendered moot by the initial compensation payments from the settlement. The community college library had held her position during her necessary absence. The broken-down truck had been replaced with a reliable used car. Superficially, they could return to their previous life, but something fundamental had changed. Not just in Riverdale's understanding of its history, but in Mei's understanding of her own capacity. The past 6 months had revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. Resilience in the face of intimidation, clarity amidst deliberate confusion, moral certainty when offered compromises that would have diminished justice. "I think we should at least look at it," Mei decided. "Maybe it's the fresh start we need." As the community celebration continued around them, people sharing stories of loved ones whose mysterious illnesses finally had explanation, activists planning next steps for the Remediation Oversight Committee, journalists conducting interviews for national broadcasts. Mei allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The inventory job that had begun as financial desperation had transformed not just Riverdale's understanding of its own history, but her personal narrative as well. She was no longer defined primarily by loss and struggle, the widow fighting for survival, the single mother juggling insufficient resources. She had become something she had never anticipated, a catalyst for justice, a voice for those silenced by institutional power, a connector between buried truth and public accountability. Later that afternoon, as they drove to view Walter Westmore's property, Mei noticed subtle changes in the landscape. Environmental teams in protective gear worked along the riverbank, methodically testing soil samples and setting up remediation equipment. Trucks bearing EPA logos moved through neighborhoods, delivering water filtration systems to homes while comprehensive solutions were implemented. Signs announced public meetings about health screening programs and compensation claim procedures. Riverdale was healing, not just environmentally but socially, the shared understanding of what had happened creating community cohesion where suspicion and fragmented suffering had previously prevailed. "Look!" Lily pointed through the window as they turned onto a tree-lined drive. "Is that it?" Walter Westmore's house appeared through the foliage, a modest mid-century structure built of natural stone and wood, designed to blend with its surroundings, rather than dominate them. Solar panels on the south-facing roof suggested practical modernization, while the surrounding gardens, though overgrown from neglect, hinted at thoughtful landscaping. Stefan, who had insisted on accompanying them for this first visit, nodded with satisfaction. This is where Walter retreated after trying to stop Project Riverflow through official channels. When institutional paths failed, he created his own parallel system, gathering evidence, preserving documentation, preparing for eventual disclosure. As they explored the property, Mei discovered thoughtful details that revealed Walter's character and priorities. A home office designed for research and documentation, extensive bookshelves filled with environmental science and ethics texts, a garden structured for both beauty and practical food production. Most significant was the small building behind the main house, what appeared to be a standard workshop from the exterior, but which contained a sophisticated air filtration system, water purification equipment, and environmental monitoring technology. "His insurance against continued contamination," Stefan explained, gesturing toward the equipment. After witnessing what Project Riverflow did to Riverdale's water supply, Walter wanted independent verification of his personal environmental safety. The discovery sparked an unexpected sense of kinship across time, recognition that Walter Westmore's journey from complicity to conscience mirrored larger patterns of human moral evolution. He had begun as part of the problem, overseeing research that prioritized national security abstractions over individual human welfare, but had transformed into an architect of eventual justice through methodical documentation and forward-thinking preparation. "It feels right," Lily announced, having completed her own exploration of the property, "like it was waiting for us." Children often perceived emotional truths that adults rationalized away. Mei had approached the property viewing with practical considerations: location, condition, suitability for their needs. Lily had simply recognized the alignment between Walter's intentions and their current circumstances. "I think you're right," Mei agreed, watching her daughter test the solidity of a tree branch as potential swing location. "It does feel like it was waiting." 3 weeks later, they officially moved in, transitioning from their cramped apartment to the spacious property that offered both privacy and purpose. The settlement funds had eliminated financial pressure, allowing Mei to reduce her working hours and focus on community organizing around the remediation and health monitoring programs. The house required updates and personalization, but its fundamental solidity, both structural and moral, provided a foundation for their new chapter. Lily enrolled in a school closer to the property, where her identity was not defined by her mother's role in exposing Project Riverflow, but by her own emerging personality and interests. On a crisp autumn evening, 6 months and 1 week after, discovering Walter Westmore's hidden archive in the abandoned factory, Mei sat on the stone patio behind their new home, watching the sunset filter through trees beginning their seasonal transformation. Daniel and Gloria had joined them for dinner, a small celebration of the settlement's final approval and the community's transition from revelation to reconstruction. "I've been thinking about how all this started," Mei said, cradling a mug of tea as twilight deepened around them. "With an eviction notice and a broken-down car, the kind of ordinary crisis that happens to people every day." "And an extraordinary response," Gloria noted. "Most people would have simply completed the inventory without questioning what they found." "I didn't set out to become a whistleblower," Mei acknowledged. "I just needed the money to keep our apartment. But once I saw those documents, understood what they meant for our community, for my husband's death, continuing the silence wasn't an option." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "The legal term is knowledge creates obligation. Once you know about a harm, you acquire some responsibility for addressing it." "Walter understood that," Stefan added from his chair near the garden's edge. "His initial failure to act when he first recognized the health impacts haunted him for the rest of his life. His evidence preservation was both atonement and instruction, showing future generations how to avoid his mistakes." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as darkness settled over the property. In the distance, lights from environmental remediation teams working overnight shifts along the river created a strange beauty, symbols of healing rather than continued harm. Lily emerged from the house in pajamas, having readied herself for bed without prompting, one of many small indicators of her accelerated maturity following their tumultuous months in temporary sanctuary. "Mom," she said, settling beside Mei on the patio bench, "my teacher asked us to write about heroes for school tomorrow. Real ones, not from movies or books." "That sounds like an interesting assignment," Mei replied. "Who are you thinking of writing about?" Lily considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "I was thinking about Walter, and Stefan, and you." "Me?" Mei asked, surprised by her inclusion. "Yeah, because you all did the scary right thing instead of the easy wrong thing, even when powerful people tried to stop you." Lily looked up at the emerging stars, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "My teacher says that's what real courage is. not being unafraid, but doing what's right, even when you are afraid. The simple articulation of moral courage brought unexpected perspective to Mei's understanding of the past 6 months. She had never considered herself particularly brave, simply a mother trying to protect her child, a widow seeking explanation for her husband's premature death, a citizen unwilling to remain complicit in ongoing harm to her community. Yet these ordinary motivations had produced extraordinary outcomes when sustained against institutional resistance, designed to exhaust individual resolve. Perhaps true heroism resided not in dramatic moments of singular bravery, but in daily recommitment to truth when falsehood offered easier paths. "I think," Mei said carefully, "that heroes are often just regular people who refuse to look away when they discover something wrong, even when looking away would be simpler." "Like you did at the factory," Lily confirmed. "Like Walter did 50 years ago." Stefan added, "like Daniel and Gloria did when they risked helping you instead of avoiding involvement." The conversation shifted to specific details Lily might include in her assignment, but Mei's thoughts remained on the nature of courage and the unpredictable paths that moral choices created. She had entered Westmore Manufacturing seeking only financial survival, never imagining that an inventory job would transform her from struggling single mother to catalyst for environmental justice. Yet that transformation had created ripples extending far beyond Riverdale. Congressional hearings on classified research oversight, EPA investigations of similar facilities nationwide, legal precedents strengthening whistleblower protections, and corporate accountability for environmental harms. As their guests departed and Mei prepared Lily for bed, the weight of these outcomes settled into perspective. What had begun as personal financial crisis had evolved into community healing and systemic reform. The path had been difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but the destination justified every hardship endured along the way. Lily fell asleep quickly, comfortable in her new bedroom with its view of trees that had never been exposed to riverflow contaminants. Mei stood in the doorway watching her daughter's peaceful breathing, struck by the contrast between their current security and the desperate circumstances that had driven her to accept the inventory job 6 months earlier. Later, sitting alone in Walter Westmore's study, now her study, surrounded by books that reflected his journey from compliance to conscience, Mei opened her laptop to review the final settlement documents. The legal language was complex, the financial provisions extensive, but the core achievement transcended technical details. Truth had prevailed over decades of deliberate concealment. Through the window, distant lights from the remediation teams continued their work along the river, the visible manifestation of accountability finally established after generations of denial. Morning would bring the first official health screening clinics, the beginning of compensation claim processing, the continued implementation of water purification systems throughout affected neighborhoods. Riverdale was healing, not just from environmental contamination, but from the deeper poison of institutional betrayal and deliberate deception. The community that had been experimentally utilized without consent was reclaiming agency through knowledge, accountability, and collective action. As Mei closed the laptop and prepared for sleep in the home that Walter Westmore had preserved for whoever finally exposed the truth, she reflected on the unpredictable connections between individual choices and systemic change. Her decision to document what she had found, rather than walk away, made in moments of fear and uncertainty, had triggered cascading revelations that ultimately transformed an entire community's understanding of its own history. The eviction notice that had seemed catastrophic had led her to the factory. The broken-down car that had represented financial crisis had initiated a chain of events leading to comprehensive environmental remediation. What had appeared to be personal misfortune had become the catalyst for collective justice delayed for 50 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, oversight committees to establish, health monitoring programs to implement, community healing processes to facilitate. But tonight, in the quiet of Walter Westmore's thoughtfully designed home, Mei allowed herself to acknowledge the distance traveled from desperate financial scrambling to purposeful reconstruction. The inventory job had revealed not just hidden evidence of environmental crimes, but her own capacity for moral courage when confronted with institutional power designed to intimidate individual conscience. What had begun as simple financial necessity had evolved into something far more significant: the reconnection of buried truth with public accountability, and the transformation of personal tragedy into catalyst for community healing. Outside, the remediation lights continued their work along the river, symbolic of the larger process unfolding in Riverdale, the methodical undoing of harm deliberately inflicted and systematically concealed. Mourning would continue this work, each day bringing the community closer to the justice Walter Westmore had envisioned but not lived to witness. In this moment of transition between exposure and healing, between revelation and reconstruction, Mei found unexpected peace, not from absence of challenge, but from alignment between personal action and collective good. The path forward remained complex, but its direction was unquestionably toward truth, accountability, and the long-delayed healing of wounds inflicted by those who had valued secrecy over human welfare. The inventory job had ended. The work of justice had just begun. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.